right now we're in the middle of a proxy war between based boys and wokies, right? Based boys and soy boys, I suppose. Like whether or not Helldivers 2 is based or woke. Now, this is much like the conservative versus liberal side of things, where like both sides are objectively fucking retarded, and the answer is like something completely different that's not even really on the table, right? Like both sides are bad, right? The game isn't good. It's not worth talking about. Like, the game isn't some epic W against the game journalists because I don't even know why. Because, like, they banned LGBT flags or some shit. Like, I don't know what they're doing. Like, I don't know why these two like sides in Gamergate are fighting over like this video game. Like it really doesn't matter. Like to me, this is a really good example of just how retarded the general Gamergate community actually is, that they actually thought this was a battle worth fighting. Because, like, yeah, video game journalism is corrupt. Everyone knows that. Why exactly would you, like, hinge your bets on, like, some random game from some no name studio being based? And we saw this with, like, Stellar Blade 2, by the way. Like, what's actually happening is pretty blatant to me, is that, like, Sony is putting a lot of money into these exclusives to make them talked about, right? You know, they have nothing else this year, right? Like, so they're trying to get like all these minor games to sell, and what are they doing? Oh, we'll antagonize the gamer gators, right? To accumulate views and attention, like to cause controversy, to get people to like check out our games, people on both sides to check out our games. So like, it doesn't actually matter whether or not the games are good or bad because they are bad compared to their Nintendo equivalents. Like, what matters is that like the community legit thinks they can use these games to weaponize against the other side, right? Like Sony is playing you like a fiddle, and you're sitting here like making tweets like, we were mislead. Like, come on, CERN, you fucking retard. I don't know how you fell for something so blatant. Like, the reason I never talked about Helldivers 2, like, was because it was obvious to me that, like, it was an astroturfing campaign. It was, like, developed, like, it wasn't relevant. Right, like this is the trend with like a lot of the games that the establishment is pushing right now. You know, stuff like Baldur's Gate 3 and like Hi-Fi Rush. Like these games have no real audience. They have no longevity. They're not going to be remembered 5 years from now. Like, but like you're still seeing game journalists like try to hype them up as the next big thing because it suits their cause, and it's not always a woke cause. Like I do think this is the thing that like people like Mark Cern, like Gamergate in general, really struggles with is that like it's not woke activists ruining video games. It is PlayStation. It is the third parties, right? The reason why Nintendo has stayed consistently good throughout the past 40 years has nothing to do with their anti political stance and everything to do with the fact that they just make better products, period. Better games, period. And yet you're sitting here seriously trying to celebrate Helldivers 2. Why? Because like it doesn't have politics in it, like modern politics specifically. Like, are you joking me? You are really going to hype up a video game because you think it panders to you specifically. And this goes to both sides, by the way. I'm not specifically shitting on CERN because I've seen like liberals do this too. Like, oh, the game is totally satirizing fascist culture. Like, real talk. Like this is like the Starship Troopers of video games, where like conservatives will try to fool you into thinking it's not fascist, and like liberals will try to be like intellectual and try to tell you that like, well, actually the asteroid was a false flag by the psychic controlled government to manipulate humanity into a pointless war with these bug-like creatures, and humanity never learns from its mistakes. Like, instead of like the real truth, where you can just read the book and have more understanding of the context of the situation, right? Like if you read the book, you would understand the movie is atrocious and doesn't under is a completely misrepresents what the author was trying to convey. right? Like the movie is pure shit, and I am tired of people trying to say it's based. Like again, it's probably the same with Helldivers. Like I haven't done like an extensive work on it. By the way, I'm planning on doing a Starship Troopers video, so I'm pretty enthusiastic about it. I got to do a lot of research for it though. But like anyway, like it's probably the same with Helldivers too. Okay, where people just don't want to acknowledge the reality of the situation, right? People don't want to admit that like your cool like sci-fi shooter about shooting bugs on alien planets isn't some based and red pilled like political statement against the gaming establishment, against the woke culture, right? That's kind of become a buzzword for the gamer gators now. Is that like, oh, I don't want politics in my games? Like instead of acknowledging that, like the problem isn't politics, because of course a lot of games cover political topics really effectively. Metal Gear Solid being a really good example. Killer 7 probably being a better one, right? But like plenty of games have political messages to that. Plenty of games have it should not be a crime to like depict certain governments or ideas in certain ways. No, the issue is that these games are being used for propaganda purposes specifically, right? The issue is that the games aren't very good, right? The issue is that people are completely willing to like downplay every good game on the market. Stuff like Princess Peach Showtime, Unicorn Overlord, in favor of like hyping up absolute nonsense that nobody cares about. Baldur's Gate 3, Helldivers 2, Dragon's Dogma 2, Rise of the Ronin. Like it's crazy the lengths people will go to avoid like the objectively superior Nintendo product. Splatoon is a really good example. Like Splatoon has outlasted Overwatch at this point, right? It's definitely going to outlast Helldivers. Like, do you see anybody acknowledging that? Like all you see is people just trying to jerk themselves off of like, oh man, Helldivers 2, it has like 30,000 players on Steam right now. Like, who cares? Who cares about Helldivers 2? Nobody. Nobody. So again, like my big takeaway from this is that like everybody involved in Gamergate 2 is a retard. Like it's not just the wokies. It's Mark Cern. It's his like followers who hang on to his every word. It's the people who don't want to admit like the reality of the situation, right? The games you've been supporting for the past 20 years from the Western video game world have all been trash, right? People like to say like, "Oh, Mark Cern, he worked on World of Warcraft." World of Warcraft was shit. StarCraft was shit. Warcraft was shit. Blizzard produced nothing good in the entire existence. Like, are you going to see people acknowledge that? Are you going to see people acknowledge Rockstar is woke now? Like, you don't see them acknowledge that with Red Dead 2. Like, you don't see people acknowledge that with Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian. Like people are still delusionally believe that Larian is going to just magically recreate the like Baldur's Gate 3, completely ignoring the fact that like they never even finished it. Like people didn't even notice that like the game gets progressively worse as you go on because most people never made it past Act 1, right? Like Larian is not some killer studio. Like you have people delusionally saying that like Cyberpunk 2077 has been fixed and it's one of the best games ever made. Meanwhile, these exact same people are like trying to tell you that like, oh, Mario Wonder, oh, it's such a disappointment. Oh, Princess Peach Showtime, oh, that's for little girls. Oh, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, oh, it's just the same as the first one. Let me guzzle down uh Dragon's Dogma 2. Like they legit did that. And I don't see the majority of players really acknowledging that, right? Like I don't see people like really acknowledging that the criticism and praise that non-Nintendo games get doesn't make any sense. Helldivers 2 was really worshipped for no reason. Like, because it was a PlayStation game on Steam, who cares? Because it had a player count, who cares? Because it's an IP that nobody's heard of, hasn't gotten sick of yet, who cares? Like, oh, it's like Starship Troopers, who cares? Like, that's my mindset about all of this. Like, who in the world cares about Helldivers 2? I, the hardcore gamer, certainly do not.